And this presentation totally blew me away. It was the first time I'd heard exercise being talked about in such an intelligent way. And it just completely changed the way I thought about exercise and nutrition to a large extent. How do we actually define health? What does health mean? What is exercise? Exercise, as you probably know, Nick, is actually a negative stress. That too much of it can be a bad thing.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a lower rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/cwarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. Health IQ customers can save up to a third because physically active people have a 56% lower risk of heart disease, 20% lower risk of cancer, and 58% lower risk of diabetes compared to people that are inactive. But your life insurance company probably just doesn't care. You care, and there are companies out there that care. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/cwarrior or mention the promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. What's up, guys? I am Lawrence Neal, and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your high-intensity training workouts for maximum gains and how to start and grow your high-intensity training business. My former guests include HIIT experts like Dr. Doug McGuff and Drew Bay, paleo pioneers Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, zero carb carnivore Dr. Sean Baker, successful strength training entrepreneurs like Luke Carlson and Roger Schwab, time management experts, minimalist, high intensity training, extreme endurance racers, sports scientists, and everything in between. This is another episode of yours truly. I was interviewed on a podcast called Addicted to Fitness. It is certainly one of my better interviews where I'm not such a nervous wreck. I started to approach various podcasts recently to help market my own show, but in doing so, just try and get the word out there and promote high intensity training and strength training in general. I'm no Dr. Doug McGuff, who's obviously amazing in all the interviews that he does, but I do my best to articulate the benefits, since I strongly believe that high intensity training has had such a massive positive impact on my own life in so many ways. And I want more people to be exposed to it. In this episode, we talk about how I went from 8 to 10 workouts, down to 1 or 2 workouts per week and got better results. And how this consolidation of my exercise really benefit every area of my life. So, my business success in terms of growing my side hustle, which at the time was Corporate Warrior, and having more success in my career as an IT salesperson, having more time with my friends and family, and then having a better romantic life as well. I talk about how my diet changed. So I used to have quite an unsustainable diet that was kind of left me always feeling a bit hungry, and how I kind of transitioned to eating more satisfying foods and a diet that really supported my goals, but also gave me a lot of energy and was also effective for fat loss and things like that. We talk about decision fatigue and how to cultivate the right environment as well, which again is really important from a fat loss perspective in terms of creating the right environment in your home and work so you're not surrounded by junk food all the time. And we talk about much, much more than that. I absolutely love being interviewed. It's a nice change, and I hope you guys enjoy this. For all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. Don't forget to hang around at the end for your free gift from me. And now I give you high intensity training with Lawrence Neal.
Thanks for joining me today, Lawrence.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I wanted to ask, where are you? Where am I speaking to you from right now? Or where are you right now as I'm speaking to you?
So I am currently living in Galway, which is a city in Ireland.
Oh, okay. Are you from Ireland originally?
No, I'm not. As you might know by my accent, I'm originally from the south of England. So I'm from the UK, and I moved over here about 7 months ago.
Gotcha. Okay, so now I know, and the reason why it's kind of interesting, obviously, you're my first transatlantic guest on the podcast, so thank you for being the first. And also that, obviously, when you reached out to be on the podcast, it was going through your website, your scheduling website. It was the efficiency blew me away. Just having the way you have everything set up was really kind of, it hooked me right away. I was like, I need to learn more from this person. So then once I started doing my research, I realized that kind of in 2012, you had an epiphany and more kind of almost like a life-changing event that changed your approach to fitness, and then by way change your approach to life. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and firstly, thank you so much. That's such a massive compliment to me. I try to make the website and the content easily consumable, and I try to make it easy for the user. So that's really nice to hear. So yeah, I guess. As you learn from the kind of about me on the website, and I guess through the content, I used to be, over 5 years ago, I used to be really into high volume, high frequency exercise. So I was doing, lots of strength training, lots of running, lots of, high intensity interval training. I would do things like ab work and net work. And I would find, and I'd also do basketball alongside that. And I'd find I'd be exercising like 8 to 10 times a week, on average. And I was so obsessed with this because I was of the belief that in order to maintain my physique, and improve my fitness, I needed to do that kind of quantity. And what that meant is my career suffered. So, at the same time, I was eating a diet that was quite challenging to sustain, which was very high in fruit, and not so high in things like healthy fats and proteins, which I focus more on now. A combination of this kind of challenging exercise regimen and challenging diet meant that I didn't have much energy and time to focus on my career. I didn't have much energy and time to focus on my side hustle, my own business, which I was always passionate about, being my own boss and doing my own thing. My relationships suffered, even my family and my relationships with my family and my, romantic relationships, and also my relationships with my friends suffered. I just didn't put enough time into nurturing those. So I was pretty unhappy, to put it bluntly. And, around 2012, I can't remember the exact date, I stumbled across a video by a Dr. Doug McGuff, who did a presentation on the 21 convention, which is a kind of a convention for self-improvement for men. And this presentation totally blew me away. It was the first time I heard exercise being talked about in such an intelligent way. And it just completely changed the way I thought about exercise and nutrition to a large extent. So Doug's basic talk was talking about, how do we actually define health? What does health mean? What is exercise? Exercise, as you probably know, Nick, is actually a negative stress. That too much of it can be a bad thing potentially. In that presentation, he's basically talking about high intensity strength training, which is a highly effective and efficient way to train the muscles and improve overall health. And so I after his presentation, I was completely blown away. And that motivated me to then go and buy Body by Science, which is Doug's book. I read the book. I was so intrigued. I immediately started implementing. I think I read the book in like 2 days. No, who knows how many copies of that book I've probably sold since I started the podcast, because I talk about it all the time. But I pretty much put that book straight into practice. And this is going to sound crazy, but I reduced my workout volume from 8 to 10 sessions a week down to literally 15 minutes to 30 minutes per week, and focused purely on strength training. And to be honest, I would supplement that with some basketball, but that was more for recreation than it was for actual exercise. Whereas this strength training was very deliberate, focused exercise. And I was so blown away by the results that I thought, you know what, this is fascinating, and I'd love to start learning more about this and create my own online domain and content. And I reached out to Doug and said, hey, Doug, loved your book. It's changed my life. I'd love to have you on my show, which wasn't a show. He was, at the time, he was my first guest. And then it all just went from there. I loved the experience so much. It grew in popularity, and that motivated me to keep going. And here we are 113 episodes later. So all good.
I was going through your catalog of episodes, and you have really the who's of the health and fitness industry. Obviously, the person you just mentioned, Mark Sisson. I listened to one with Steve Maxwell, who I'm a huge fan of also. You just recently had Sean Baker on, who was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, there's a whole different areas I want to go into right now, but since we're talking about podcasts, I want to know maybe a couple episodes that you would recommend right off the bat people listen to check out on the Corporate Warrior podcast.
Okay, so the first ones that come to mind for me and are kind of special to me are the ones I've done with Dr. Doug McGuff. In my view, he's probably, in my view, the top. If you're looking for someone who has a very, very clear and good understanding of exercise and diet from a generalist point of view, he is just like no one else I know. The advice that he's given me over the years through his books and through interviewing him has been invaluable. So I've interviewed Doug 3 times. So I would encourage anyone who wants to learn more about really effective and sustainable exercise to check out my interviews with him. So I've done 3 and in fact, I've done 4, but the 4th one only just recorded, which, to be fair, it should be published around the time you publish this, probably just after, because I'm thinking kind of mid-February. But that's where I would start. But obviously, it's really hard for me because I love so many of the episodes that I did. Another one which I really enjoy was, and it's my most popular actually today, is my first podcast with Dr. Ted Naiman, who's he's a board certified medical doctor, but he's an expert in diet and metabolism. But he just also happens to be a big fan of high intensity strength training, which he does using body weight. And that is another very, very popular and very good episode. So I did 2 with Ted Naiman. So yeah, I would start listeners with Dr. Doug McGuff and Dr. Ted Naiman, I think.
Was that Tim Naiman or Ted?
Ted, T-E-D.
Okay, good. I'll make sure I'll put all the links for that in our show notes when we do this episode, so people can easily get a hold of the Corporate Warrior podcast episodes you just mentioned.
Thanks.
So there was a couple things you mentioned when you were talking about those people you interviewed was about nutrition. And I know you're an author of an ebook about fat loss, and being a personal trainer, I always get, questions from clients about what's the best way to lose fat. And I'd love to hear your approach and what you've discovered after talking to so many people in the industry, in the health industry, about what probably the optimum approach to fat loss is.
Yeah, sure. I would also just like to say, jumping back, because I forgot to mention something earlier, which is when I reduced my exercise right down and made it far more efficient and effective, that gave me all my time back. So all those areas that were suffering suddenly improved a lot. So I was able to create, obviously, a successful business. I had a lot of success in IT sales in London, in the UK. And I had, I met my now partner. So I wanted to mention that as well, because that's kind of part of my story, which I think is quite nice to hear. But yeah, so in terms of fat loss, I've learned a ton on this, and obviously I've implemented a lot of what I've learned on myself and on friends and also clients that I work with. I think my current position would be that I think it's really important for people to focus their diet on because obviously fat loss is literally 95% diet. You can't, as a well-known saying, which is that you can't outwork a bad diet, right? If you exercise, yes, you will burn some calories, and if you build muscle, it will make fat loss a bit more permissive because you're more insulin sensitive and you will increase your metabolism. So you're kind of like signaling the right things if you're doing those activities. And I am a believer of if you and this is really me parroting Doug McGuff, but if you build muscle and you're very active, you will reduce the utility of stored body fat. So I think it does help get you towards a leaner body composition. But talking about diet, which I think is the key thing people need to focus on, I think it's really important to prioritize foods that are nutrient dense and high in protein. I think a lot of I think it comes down to calorie balance at the end of the day. But I think if you try and control for calories and you don't control these other things, I think it can be very difficult to sustain a calorie deficit over a long period of time. Rather, by focusing on high protein, ideally, and nutrient dense food, the calories kind of take care of themselves. So just to elaborate on that, when I talk about nutrient dense food, I'm talking about fish, meat, fowl, eggs, obviously the highest quality that one can afford, high quality vegetables, mostly green vegetables. I mean, these are things that I think a lot of people know. And then obviously the avoidance of the high energy, the energy dense, but the low nutrients food, like, the vegetable oils, the sugary goods, the junk food, the bread, stuff like that. I think somewhere in the middle is probably things like butter, cheese, and potato. I think they're good as like a condiment or something to eat in moderation. But the primary staple, and focus of the diet should be these nutrient dense foods that tend to be high in protein. And obviously that's what really drew me to Sean Baker's experiment, and he's pure carnivore. And I've somewhat become a bit of a carnivore myself, although I'm not totally carnivorous. So I think that's really important. And what I've noticed is if people focus on that as a model, like in terms of focusing their eating on those kind of nutrient dense and high protein foods, pretty much everything else starts taking care of itself, because your appetite is satiated, you don't feel as hungry, so you won't eat as much. You'll have all the nutrients, so your body's not going to be, elevating your hunger to try and get more protein or get more nutrients. So I think that just works really, really well. It just so happens that if you eat that way, it is going to be a low carb, higher protein, higher fat diet. So I feel like that's more of a byproduct as opposed to the low carb being the magic bullet, so that's kind of my first bit of advice. And the second thing I think is really important is looking after your environment. I think people really underplay the importance of things like decision fatigue. So decision fatigue is a thing that happens when you are fatigued from making too many decisions through the day. And if you are spending your days making lots of trivial decisions that actually don't either need to be made or could be automated, things like what you're going to have for breakfast, what you're going to do as your morning routine, things that I think should be somewhat automated, it means that when you come home, you're going to have less willpower. You know, when you come home after a hard day's work, if you've got bad food in the cupboards, you know, the likelihood is you're far more likely to just go, not make a very good decision and just eat that food. So I think it's important that people start looking at their day and going, okay, I've got a finite number of decision-making hit points every day. And in trying to automate those very trivial decisions, and trying to kind of preserve some of that willpower. Now, another thing you can do, and this is probably more important, is by cultivating an environment that's not full of junk food. So I think this is so key, because even someone like me, and I do consider myself quite an outlier, I am quite disciplined with diet. If I have bad food in my cupboards or in my fridge, and I'm, currently today, for instance, I'm working from home, I'm much, much more likely, I'm going to eat that stuff. I'm much more likely to snack on it. Whereas if I cultivate a very healthy environment, be it at home or at work, I'm not likely to do that. And I'm much more likely to opt to default to healthier food. So I think that's a big one. I think one of the biggest challenges people have is they're constantly surrounded by this high energy food. And, we're wired for a time when you wouldn't have that. So of course, if it's there, you're much more likely to consume it, because that's kind of where our ancient wiring is kind of geared us towards. So that's a big one. So cultivate a healthy home environment, get all the junk food out, and do the same for your work environment if you can. And then if you're going to have a cheat day, which I think is fine in moderation, or you're going to have a cheat meal or a takeaway, buy the stuff, eat it, and then bin the rest, for the next day. And I think that works quite well. So those are really important. I still think strength training is really important, building muscle, because you don't want to diet ideally without doing some kind of intense or high effort exercise, because you will lose muscle mass. And that's something I don't think is ideal, because that will obviously reduce metabolism and has a number of other negative health consequences. So I do think it's kind of a combination of strength training, eating high protein, nutritious food, and cultivating a healthy environment. And that is what I have learned, doing a whole ton of research myself. So I'm, a bookworm, I'm sure, like you are, Nick. I do read as much research as I can. I do try and read the scientific literature. And then I obviously talk to some of the best in the world on this subject, and I try and find out, what is the latest research showing in terms of what is effective for fat loss. I also think, just to add, if you don't mind, Nick, I know I've been going on for ages.
Please do.
For me, I've had a bit of my own kind of dietary epiphany in the last 6 months. So I used to be, big advocate of eating protein in the morning. I didn't really like the idea of doing intermittent fasting. And I kind of thought that was also important for me as being a hard gainer myself in terms of preserving muscle tissue. But I always had like a bit of fat that I kind of wanted to lose. And I am kind of like, most people who hear that, who know me, would think, are you kidding me, Lawrence? Like, you have no fat to lose. But, when it's yourself, it's different. Like, you know kind of what you want to achieve. And when I moved to Ireland, I temporarily lived with my partner's mum, and she really didn't like me going into the kitchen and cooking. So I really had to kind of just cook whatever she gave me. And she would cook 2 meals a day. So I just kind of defaulted to this 2 meal a day schedule, which was, usually, lunch or brunch or something like that, and then dinner. So, we'd have probably 2 large meals and usually quite big gaps between meals. I wouldn't really snack. And what I noticed is, even though I was eating sometimes not very well, and I was eating like foods that weren't that ideal, my body composition was getting better, because I was obviously eating, less calories over time. And it kind of occurred to me that, so by doing this intermittent fasting thing, there's no downside, in terms of I don't feel different. Like, I still feel like I don't feel that hungry in the morning anyway. And I'm still getting these like really like good meals in a day. I felt like this is something I could sustain. So when I moved to Galway and had my own place and started cooking for myself much more often, I just stuck with it. So instead of obviously having, the food she was giving me, I was focused more on kind of nutrient dense, high protein food. Sorry, excuse me. So I was having lots of steak, eggs, vegetables, stuff like that. But I would have just literally the lunch and dinner. So I really continued to practice that intermittent fasting. And I just got really effortlessly lean doing that. Like I got, 6-pack abs, or I had 6-pack abs already, but I got even a better definition from switching to eating this way. And not to mention how much more efficient it is. You buy less food. You feel better, you've got more energy, you're not consuming a ton of calories. And it just makes sense to me. So, having a lot of projects on the go now, I figured, why not just continue doing this, and it's worked really well. And now it's time for a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a lower rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/CWarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/CWarrior or mention a promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. And now back to the show, and it's worked really well.
Right. And your eating window is what, about 8 hours? Was that what it was?
I would say so. In an ideal world, right. I don't follow that every day. There are some days where I'm like, it's 10 a.m. and I'm pretty hungry. So I will eat a large meal at 10, but then I won't eat another meal till probably 7, 8 p.m. But I do tend to probably stick in the 8-hour eating window. So 16-8, I suppose, is quite accurate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I know. And I've heard a lot of that, basically from Dr. Rhonda Patrick about the benefits of, time restricted eating, about especially syncing it up to your natural body clock, how much benefits they're finding out about that right now. And I've shared that with my clients too. So one thing you touched on about kind of the approach to nutrition is the kind of prior planning, essentially, or setting yourself up for success. And I tell clients one of the easiest things, and I know it sounds super simple, is actually making a grocery list and sticking to that grocery list when you go to the grocery store. There's so many people that I face, especially my clients, that will just go to the grocery store and they'll buy whatever, because either they'll go hungry usually, and then they'll go and they'll just impulse buy. And that's when you set up, and when you go home, and your cabinets are full of that stuff that's not going to be beneficial to you in the long run.
That's a great idea. I'm stealing that.
So what I wanted to ask you, because you touched on it, is your approach to strength training, the high intensity training. It's a little bit different because a lot of people think, oh, that's HIIT, that's HIIT, but it's definitely a different approach, and I'd love for you to elaborate on it.
Sure, I'd love to. It's funny, right? High intensity training is so overused that it's become quite underdefined. So it's used to describe so many different approaches to exercise now, because it's kind of the cool thing, which is a little bit irritating, because when I talk about, so if I say, I do high intensity training, people immediately assume it's some kind of exercise regime that they understand as being HIIT, but actually it's completely different most of the time. So the type of high intensity strength training that I do, and that I was inspired by, is the strength training popularized by Arthur Jones, who was a American inventor and entrepreneur in the 70s and 80s. And he passed away, I think, over probably about 10 years ago. But his kind of legacy has lived on in the high intensity strength training community. And the type of training I'm talking about is strength training, so resistance training with machines or free weights or body weight. Typically done, although doesn't always have to be, with a single set to muscular failure. So if you imagine doing I guess the easiest thing to kind of envision is kind of like a chest press machine or a pull down, like a lat pull down. You're essentially doing a set but you're going to concentric, so typically positive failure. So you're going through a typical set, so it might be 8 to 12 repetitions, performed nice and smoothly with smooth turnarounds and performed to muscular failure. And as soon as you've done that exercise, you move on to the next one. And essentially, with most protocols, you're trying to cover the whole musculature of the body in one workout. And once you've done that, you'll need then obviously a certain amount of rest and recovery before your next session. And it's the focus of something like high intensity strength training is trying to find the minimal effective dose. What is going to flick the switch for the optimal stimulation of muscle gain, strength, improvements in cardiovascular conditioning, bone mineral density. What's going to do that in the most effective and efficient way so that we can spend the rest of our life doing things that are kind of more interesting to us, and not kind of spend all our time doing exercise. Obviously there's lots of exceptions to that rule. If you're an athlete or if you're really interested in doing different types of sports, then obviously you have to kind of adapt this template to that person. But in a nutshell, that's the kind of strength training that it is. And hopefully that kind of makes sense. And I'm happy to elaborate if you've got any questions on that, because I know it could just sound like a lot of other resistance training methods out there.
Right. So, the amount of reps you would do per set is just a single rep, and it's based on maybe time under the muscles under tension.
So let me explain that. So, in high intensity training, they don't some people do measure repetitions. It's not one rep, it's generally one set. Although some people do multiple sets, it really doesn't matter. I guess traditional high intensity strength training is based on a single set to muscular failure. So if you imagine you're just doing a chest press, so you're moving back and forth, you're building up fatigue as you go through, and then eventually you're going to get to a point where you can't move that weight anymore. So obviously it's ideal to set a fairly, moderate to heavy load at the beginning, ideally, so that you're not, exercising for an extended period of time. And then once you hit muscular failure, you're pushing against that. You're still contracting as hard as you can for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, and you're slowly letting the weight back down to the starting position. So that's like one set. And then you're moving on to a leg press, exactly the same process. You're doing repetitions and like you were saying, time under load, which is just muscle under tension. So in high intensity training, we prefer typically to measure time under load because it's a slightly more accurate way of measuring performance, because reps can be kind of arbitrary if you've gone from doing a 4 second concentric, 4 second eccentric repetition to doing like a 20-second repetition, then 5 reps or 6 reps or 7 reps kind of becomes a little bit arbitrary. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
So yeah, okay. Hence why. So time under load is kind of I guess in my opinion, a more accurate way to measure performance.
Gotcha. That's definitely it helps me explain it a little bit, or it helps me understand it a little bit better. So I appreciate you elaborating on that more. And if people want to get more information about this type of strength training, they should definitely check out your website, 15Minute Corporate Warrior, correct? .com?
That's correct. Yeah, 15minutescorporatewarrior.com, or just go to corporatewarrior.org, and that will send you to my podcast page, which has got all of the episodes. So it's literally like a buffet of all of the podcasts.
Right.
But I would also just say, if there's one resource I always recommend to people, it's Doug's book, Body by Science. I have no affiliation, I don't earn any money recommending that book, but it's a great investment for anyone who wants to take their health and fitness to the next level.
Right, I do. I have that written down because that's something I'm definitely going to invest in, because I'm always, like you mentioned, always got to look for more knowledge in regards to fitness when I'm trying to relay that to people, because that's the best weapon, is having all the knowledge. Well, it's hard to have all the knowledge, but it's trying to gain knowledge from different sources is obviously the most optimum way, I think, to health and fitness. Now, also, people can also enlist your services as a coach if they're they need some help for fitness. Also, isn't that true? Yeah,
that's right. So this has kind of morphed over time. It's a service I launched a few months ago because prior to that, I was just focused on the podcast, and then I realized, I've obviously learned a ton about how to help people in terms of fat loss and muscle gain. And, I've always done favors for friends in the past, just helping them get into shape. And I've helped some people lose a tremendous amount of body fat. And obviously I've done that on myself as well. And I decided to launch that service, and what I now really focus on is I like to work with people that are really, really motivated in achieving goals with regard to like body transformation. So I tend to work with, as the site name might suggest, corporate warriors. So people that are tend to be quite senior, I guess, within the business domain, who are very, very busy, pretty stressed out, and, you know, they've got excess body fat, or they're trying to gain some muscle and they struggle to find the time, who are looking for the most efficient and effective methods to do that and need someone to help keep them accountable. So that's where I'm kind of focused on. So if the listeners kind of fit that mold, then I'd be very obviously happy to have provide them with a consultation and go from there. And if people want to contact me about that, probably the best way is to email me at hitbodycoach@gmail.com. So that's hitbodycoach@gmail.com.
All right. Once again, I'm writing that down right now so I can include that in the show notes and pass that on to the listeners. So if they are interested in contacting you, they can definitely find that out. So, also, Lawrence, obviously, I want to thank you once again for coming on, being someone. After looking through your bio, listening to many of your episodes, it's kind of inspiring to see someone like yourself who had the revelation and had kind of the epiphany in regards to fitness, and has now been able to maximize your time, and it has made the podcast and the blog, and also now being a kind of a health coach. You're full-time, not full-time, but I know you also have other ventures and things like that, but it's also kind of like your main occupation.
That's
and
right.
Seeing that, and it's very inspiring. I mean, I know probably someone like you, Tim Ferriss, and the 4-hour work week and 4-hour body are probably things, hopefully, after hearing you speak, probably something you've already been familiar with.
I am the biggest Tim Ferriss fanboy from the UK. I am a huge fan of that man.
I mean, obviously, it's easy to see, like, through kind of the practices you have. So it's definitely someone that person like him, he's inspiring to me. So you're also inspiring to me, and something I can aspire to be, because obviously I love the podcasting, I love fitness, and molding the two together is what we're trying to do on the Addicted to Fitness.
Well, you guys are doing a great job. You know, your podcast, you've done tons of episodes. You know, you just got to keep going, man. Like, you've got some great work to share and knowledge to share. So keep doing your thing, and you'll achieve your goals. It's just like you said, it's fusing the passion with the desire to help others and finding the mediums that work for you. And clearly you've done that with the podcast. So.
Yeah. No, and I really appreciate you coming on. Please, once again, letting people know how they can get in contact you and how they can maybe listen to more of your podcast and read your blog. So
I guess, so a few things. So if you've got any podcast app, so like iTunes or any of these like podcast directory apps on smartphone, if you just type Corporate Warrior, it'll come up. And the logo is a fairly ripped chap with a shirt and tie. So that's how you can find the podcast. And then corporatewarrior.org is the domain for all of the podcast episodes. So if people want to see that kind of buffet of episodes on the website. And that's I would just leave people with that for now, because if you go there, then there's obviously a contact me page. If you want to drop me an email or find out more about me, it's all on the website. So hopefully it should be quite sort of self-explanatory for people.
Excellent. Once again, I'm going to reiterate it. I know I've done it twice already, but all those links will be on our show notes for this episode, so please check them out. And Lawrence, I hope you enjoyed coming on with us today. I know I enjoyed it, and I really hope maybe you'd like to come on in the future, and we can catch up on what other new information you've gathered, and we can share it with the listeners.
Absolutely. I've loved being on. I really appreciate you having me on, Nick.
All right. Thanks, Lawrence. Talk to you again.
Talk to you soon. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's corpwarrior.com, to get your free high-intensity training Google Progress chart and ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are deliberately not verbatim. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, enter your email address, then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.